Hi everyone, I'm Rincey and this is Rincey Reads. Today I'm going to be doing another weekly reading wrap-up. I am kind of low on energy today, so I apologize in advance for the low energy of this video, I guess. Or potentially, I don't know what it's actually going to turn out to be. Anyways, let's jump into it. So first, I'm just going to briefly mention that I DNF'd the Tropic of Serpents. I'm only mentioning this because I mentioned this in last week's Friday Reads video. And I don't have anything like crazy to say about it. Like I got a quarter of the way through and I was just like, I don't think I actually really care right now about this book. And since it's, from the library and whatever, I'm like, I'm just gonna like stop reading it, because if there's one thing I am avoiding, especially this year, is just like, if a book isn't clicking with my brain, it's not going to click with my brain even more if I like force it to like work. So I'm like, it's a library book, I'll just return it. If I feel like I'm in the mood for it again, I'll check it back out again. Not that big of a deal. All right, the other two books that I have to talk about this week were, pretty good. I feel like I had a pretty solid reading week, nothing extraordinary. But, I enjoyed the other two books that I finished so far this week. So the first one I have is The Son of Good Fortune by, I think it's Leslie Tenorio. I probably should have looked that up before I started recording this video. This is a book that came out earlier this year, and it's definitely one of those sort of like smaller, under the radar books in my opinion, because I don't think I've really seen very many people talking about this. The only reason why I knew that this was a book that existed in the world is because I do like the new release Tuesday videos for Book Riot, and so like I'm always kind of looking up what books are coming out, and this is one I featured in one of those videos because it sounded interesting to me. So this is a contemporary fiction book that mainly follows this character named Excel, who is a Filipino American, and he is actually an undocumented American, and him and his mom live in the United States, and so he finds out that he's undocumented when he is 10 years old. Specifically on his 10th birthday, his mom tells him that they are undocumented, and it's basically this huge secret that she tells him, like, you can never tell anyone that anything about this. You have to make sure you like never get in trouble or, do anything along those lines, because we're undocumented and terrible things might happen if other people find that out, or like the police or anything like that get involved in our lives, stuff like that. And so like ever since that young age, he's basically like held that secret like extremely close, because he's always been like terrified of what could potentially happen. And so the sort of like modern or like current day storyline is following him when he's like 19-20 years old. So like after high school, he doesn't end up going to college, but like when I think he's a senior in high school, he meets this girl, and this girl has basically like moved around a lot, and she decides that she is going to move to Southern California. They live in, I think, outside of San Francisco. Excel decides to move with this girl down to like this small town in, I think, Southern California, and live in like a trailer with her, and this girl has like a job that she can work with her cousin and stuff like that. And so he decides this is going to be like the big move he's going to make in his life, but like he doesn't tell his mom that he's leaving like this. Like he tells her he's going to work on like an archaeological dig or something like wild like that. Basically, when the story begins, Excel is actually returning after about like a year away, and you find out that things didn't go super great while he was off in Southern California, and he's back home because he owes some money. Actually, like a massive amount of money. Like most literary fiction books, there is a plot. There is probably more plot to this than like most literary fiction books, but it's not really the plot that's important here. This is like a really interesting and beautiful book about like family, and specifically like a mother and son relationship, and kind of like the immigrant experience and what it's like also to be an undocumented American, which I think is also really interesting because I feel like most stories about undocumented Americans usually follow people from either Mexico, Central America, South America, things like that. And so the kind of flip on that story of following an Asian person or someone of Asian descent who is undocumented in the United States is really interesting, and kind of like finding out their story of how and why they came to the United States. And there's also like this whole other storyline of Excel's mom, whose name is Maxima, was like a B or C rated actress in the Philippines, and like when she came over to the United States, like her way of making money basically mainly came from like scamming men online. And so it creates this sort of like really interesting dynamic, I guess, between Excel and Maxima and things like that. And you kind of see one, this coming of age story of Excel, because it both flashes back in time and you see a little bit about what their lives were like while Excel was growing up, but it also shows sort of like how Excel made certain choices in his life because of the fact that he's undocumented, and like sort of the regrets that he has, or sort of like the way that he's holding that against his mom in different ways and stuff like that. And so it's kind of like part coming of age story, part family story, part immigrant story, part undocumented American story, all of this stuff kind of rolled into one. It's really beautiful, really moving. It's a story unlike anything else that I've really read before. The main thing that I like didn't like, quote unquote, is that like Excel is a real jerk face. Or like, I mean, I shouldn't really say that. He's a teenager. Like, he's out of high school. He has no like real idea what he wants to do, what he's going to do, anything along those lines. Like, he's not going to college. He works at like a job that treats him terribly, and even when he moves to Southern California, like, he doesn't have a lot of prospects, and also he's like holding the secret, so he's like keeping everyone at a distance all at the same time. So it creates this really interesting character and this really interesting dynamic of him compared to everyone else around him, and sort of like how he's moving in this world, and also kind of like how he's unable to move in this world. So yeah, I really enjoyed this a lot. I think I gave this like a 3.5 stars because, again, some of the storylines while you're following Excel, I just wanted to punch him in the face, which maybe isn't a bad thing. I definitely think that like this story would have been fascinating if we had gotten some perspectives from Maxima, the mom's point of view, because she is 100% the most interesting person in this book. So I do think like that sort of was a lost opportunity almost. But this was really, really well written, and I'll definitely like keep an eye out to see if this author ends up writing any more stuff. All right, and then the other book I want to talk about this week is The Library of the Unwritten by A.J. Hackwith. This is a fantasy book that came out last year, and this was like a really fun read. This is actually a book that I forgot that I had on my shelves, and I honestly thought I had gotten rid of this book, and when I was doing my nonfiction November TBR, or like prepping for it and going through like my unread books, I saw this one there and I was like, oh, this is a book that I wanted to read last Halloween. It came out last October. This is an advanced copy of it, and I never read it. So I'm like, oh, it's almost Halloween now. That'll be a good book to pick up this week. It has nothing to do with Halloween, but it is kind of like fun with like demons and monsters and stuff like that. So this is a book that's like very close to our real world. You are following this character named Claire, who is a librarian in hell. And so she's specifically the librarian in the Unwritten wing, which is like a neutral space. And it's this place where all of the unfinished stories by authors go to live. And so her job is to like keep that space organized, make sure, like, if people want to check out books from the wing, you know, like, it's her job to organize all that stuff, but also sometimes, like, characters from these books come to life and escape, and so she has to go and get them back and bring them back to the wing. The main crux of this story comes about because it turns out that there is a book that the devil wrote. I think they just call it the Devil's Book, and some of the pages exist out in the world, and it has like a very strong force or power or something along those lines. And so Claire basically decides that she's going to go and try to find these pages and bring them back to the library. But obviously things are not that easy. There are a number of really fun characters in here, including 2 angels who are also on the lookout for these pages. She has an assistant that is a former muse. She has this teenage, probably aged boy who has recently passed away, who like helps on these adventures. Also, there's this character that they call Hero, who is the hero of one of the books that in the beginning of this story she was actually chasing down, stuff like that. So this book has like very strong Neil Gaiman, Terry Pratchett sort of vibes to it, because like if you enjoy a book like American Gods or Good Omens or something along those lines, like this is very much akin to those books. It has sort of like every version of the afterlife exists in this world, so they all kind of exist in parallel. So like the, you know, Judeo-Christian idea of like heaven and hell exists, along with Valhalla, along with, you know, the Greek mythology version of like the river Styx and all that stuff. So all of those exist in parallel. And so kind of similar to something like American Gods and Good Omens, which pulls on sort of like mythology and theology and religious history and all of that stuff, this book does that exact same thing as well, while also combining it with like kind of this adventure story and stuff like that. It's also like, you know, has the same sort of like witty tone, kind of winking at the camera sort of thing, a lot of like play on words. There's a lot of discussion in here about like books and writing and things along those lines. And yeah, like I said, it was just like a really fun read. It's really fast paced. I do think it's does feel a little bit padded at times. The story is told from like multiple characters' points of view. There are definitely like some parts of the story that I cared about more than others, but that's generally par of the course when it comes to books with a lot of perspectives in it. But overall, I just found this to be really fun and really lighthearted, and I think, you know, kind of something nice to read. So I think if you are someone who again enjoys sort of like the Terry Pratchett, Neil Gaiman, witty, playing on mythology sort of vibe thing, then I think that this is definitely a book worth picking up. And I believe that this is like the first in the series, and I think the second book in the series is already out. I don't know if I'm going to keep going with it, just because this book like fully stands on its own, although it ends in a way that shows that like they can build on it and like create more stories that exist in this world. This one fully stands on its own, so you don't like need to keep going with the series or anything like that. So yeah, this is another one that I would say is a solid like 3.5 stars for me. And if you're interested in something kind of fun and fast paced, this might be worth picking up. So yeah, that is everything I have to talk about this week. I'm not going to talk about what I'm currently reading because we saw how that went last week. But I am starting to pick up some of the nonfiction books that I talked about, or I should say I picked up a nonfiction book. And it's not even one of the ones I talked about in my TBR video, so this is why I never make TBR videos. We're doing like a nonfiction episode for Red or Dead, and so, you know, I'm like testing out a couple of books to see which one works for me to talk about in that episode. So yeah. Let me know down in the comments below if you've read any of the books that I talked about here today, what your thoughts were on them, or if you have any questions about anything I talked about here, feel free to leave that down in the comment section below. Otherwise, tell me about something you've been reading recently that you have enjoyed. So yeah, that's all I have for now, and thanks for watching.